All right, another significant moment for India over here because the G20 declaration has been adopted unanimously and this will be announced also. This is what the announcement Prime Minister Narendra Modi just made a short while ago, that the G20 declaration has been adopted unanimously by all the G20 members. Now, there were questions around it, but now very successfully this has happened. And to discuss more on this, I have with me former Ambassador Manjeev, Puri. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here. This is a very significant moment for India. The declaration has been adopted. We would remember the days when India was taking its presidency forward from Joko Widodo. And this is not an era of war, found its place in the G20 declaration at that point of time. Now, the New Delhi G20 declaration will also be launched. What is the significance? What is the meaning and depth of this?
So thank you very much. First, I must tell you, this is a very important moment. You know, the greatest doubt that was being sort of put across was, will there be a communique? Will there be a statement? Will there be a Delhi declaration? I hope for all the doubters, it is now clear that there is a Delhi declaration, and it is a declaration which has brought the G20 countries together. This by itself is a tremendous achievement and a recognition of India and our leadership of the G20. And, you know, we must all congratulate the Honorable Prime Minister, the Sherpa, and the entire team. This is really very good news. Secondly, I think what is very important is that, you know, apart from this Ukraine issue, which was really very problematic and difficult to negotiate, there is this entire business that our G20 has brought to the fore so many issues which are of critical importance in the world today, especially for the global south. And this paves the way for meaningful action on all of them cohesively by the largest economies in the world domestically, as well as at the relevant fora which deal with them multilaterally.
G20,
very, very good news.
Right, absolutely. G20 is indeed a very, very strong grouping in itself, considering its GDP contribution in total, considering its power at the global level, and its historic moment that it is taking place this time in India. When we talk about this declaration, what sort of a message it sends across the globe?
So first, you know, before we get into the declaration, let's also say that the admittance of the African Union has added several percentage points to what you said the G20 symbolizes in terms of GDP, in terms of population, etc. This by itself is a particularly important and a momentous occasion because the African Union, with 55 countries, is not only the partner of the largest economies in the world, but the continent which must progress, which must develop, which must be part of the delivery mechanism for betterment of the human world, including in areas such as sustainable development, climate change, and all such areas. This is the first thing. The second thing I want to tell you is, let me echo what Amitabh Kant, the Sherpa, had to say yesterday. Ours will be a voice for the global south. And I think that is particularly important. What are we talking about? We're talking about issues of debt, the fact that debt is becoming unsustainable. I am sure there will be appropriate wordings. I haven't seen the text as yet. There would be appropriate wordings on that. I am sure there will be action on sustainability, on climate finance, on recognizing digital public infrastructure, on cryptocurrencies, women-led development, all the issues which were important to us and which the world is also recognizing as important issues and important action points for, as I said, the whole business of a human-centric development of the human race and our planet.
And a year ago, when this theme was launched called One Earth, One Family, One Future, India is completely doing justice to its theme ahead of the second summit that is about to begin, which is on One Family. And India has now announced, first of all, the EU membership, the AU, African Union membership, and now this joint declaration announcement, a huge achievement.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, the African Union is 55 countries. They are critically important to the fact that the globe adjusts and takes us forward, especially at this very difficult moment when climate change is becoming something that is not just a matter of talk shops, but everybody is feeling climate change. We are feeling it in India, all countries across the world. What does it require? It requires global action. It requires all countries to be on the same page. And it requires the multilateral system, in particular the development banks, to deliver. And I think all of these factors have been done. Then let me come to another issue, which is very important, which is the business of debt. And the African countries have really been reeling under that. COVID pandemic hit them hard. It hit the whole world very hard. But recovery needs to be assisted. Recovery needs to be smoothened. And the path needs to be one which can actually be undertaken by the country and not that it is so onerous that it can't be done. The G20 owed them that. We made it a point that this would be a center point of what we would push for. And I'm glad to see that all that is falling into place.
And Ambassador Puri, when we talk about this particular decision of admitting and pushing, first of all, African Union to become a permanent member of the G20, and the Prime Minister has successfully done that, you would remember that as the G20 President, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also spoke about global skill mapping. And when we talk about the 55-member African Union bloc, they comprise of around 1.3 billion people who are the youth of African Union. And when we connect the dot and we talk about global skill mapping and their contribution to the entire ecosystem and the economy of the globe, what does this signify?
Absolutely what you said. You know, it is 55 countries, more than 1 billion people. And let me assure you that in the years and decades to come, the gross total of Africa's GDP will shine in comparison to several other parts of the world. Therefore, what are they? They are on the cusp of realizing their potential. So it's not just a question of what you said, people matter. And without doubt, Africa matters because it has this demographic dividend, which for many of us, not India, but for many other countries in the world, in particular Europe, Japan, etc., is an absolutely diminishing proposition. So where are you going to get the people from? After all, everything is about people, and it's Africa, which is the center of all of this. Bringing them in was a stroke which needed to be done. The fact that we managed the diplomacy is kudos to us, but I think the gainer is the entire globe.
And when we talk about climate change, that is also on top of the agenda. Climate finance is also one of the agenda. And there's a huge gap between developing countries and the developed countries, and the question of developed countries to support developing countries and bridging the gap. How important India is playing a role in this, and what could we expect this on the declaration papers?
You know, climate change is the biggest challenge that the entire world faces, whether you are in the developed world or in the developing world. It's an existentialist challenge in that sense, a challenge to human life on this planet. Now, we all have to come together. We've been talking about it for long, but let's look at Paris, the UN FCCC agreement, which was reached in 2016. India is perhaps the only country among the G20 which actually is not only meeting its commitment going ahead. The Europeans are doing well also, but most of the others are not. Now, the critical aspect, of course, is this question of burden sharing. And it's not just a question of cut down fossil fuels, reduce greenhouse gas. It's not only that. It's a question of where do you have the resources to be able to do all of that. And resources essentially mean two things, technology and money. And if I may put it even more bluntly, technology also becomes possible if you have the money. The developed countries, as early as 2009 in Copenhagen, promised $100 billion a year for the developing world to meet and to develop ambitious targets on climate. We are nowhere near that. We are still making whataboutery about that 100 billion. But the needs are huge and much more. And India is one of the countries which is playing a massive role in doing things itself, even though global cooperation is, if I may say so, at best in terms of technical cooperation. And we are willing to do this not only for ourselves, but also for our friends in the developing world, in particular the Africans, the small island development states. we are very mindful of
Rightly so.
everyone coming together.
Rightly so. And before moving on, we would once again, Ambassador Puri, like to hear what Prime Minister just said. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on the sidelines of G20 summit as well. But before that, let's quickly hear once again to what Prime Minister announced that is really huge and historic in itself. Listen in.
हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं।
This is indeed People's G20. We are back on discussion. So when we talk about this historic decision and this historic announcement that the declaration has now been unanimously agreed, what we talked about, what sort of a message this sends to the globe, but how is it going to help in strengthening India's bid to become a developed nation by the year 2047?
You know, that's obviously the most important question for all you and me. Why are we doing all this? So one reason is, you know, we've come of age, 75 years of our independence. We celebrated last year. We are now the largest country in the world. And mind you me, while we here in India think of it as a huge population issue, where will the world look at us? Whichever way you look at it, in one of the columns or one of the lines, we will stand first. And the world notices who's the biggest. That's us. Secondly,
right.
Not just that we are the biggest, but we are on our way to certainly becoming the third largest economy in the world. What a change. Let me say this to you. I joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1982. We hosted the NAM summit in 1983 and felt incredibly proud to have the entire developing world come to New Delhi. 40 years later, am I not a very proud Indian to see the most powerful, the economically most capable, responsible, large nations come to Delhi and India and our Prime Minister be the president of that particular meeting? It's a great change, tectonic change, game-changing matter, and certainly one that makes all Indians very proud. Now, let me take a few seconds to answer your question. What does it mean for us? Look, India is a growing economy, but you know, India is also an economy which needs resources. And mind you, no matter the size of our economy, the challenges of climate change, the challenges of development are tremendous. And we need monies coming in from overseas. It doesn't have to be aid, but it certainly needs to be investment monies coming into us. As the multilateral system gets evolved, as things change, and as the world, especially the private world, recognizes that not only India is huge in size, but it is the great global sweet spot, not only of today, but of tomorrow. That is when we are going to see tectonic changes and benefits accruing to the Indian economy. And let me put it, you and me, in our lives.
And this is not an overnight development or a development that has happened after India assumed its G20 presidency. But in the past 9 or 10 years, we've witnessed the changes, and especially in the changing structural reforms.
Well, you know, the acronym BRIC was coined at the turn of this century in the year 2000. And that's when the world started noticing who we are. The last 10 years have been particularly good as far as India is concerned. Remember, the entire globe, including us, we weathered the COVID pandemic. which is a once in 100-year phenomenon, something that the world had never thought of. The entire generations had never heard of such kind of global pandemics taking place. Look at where we are going today. The entire world is facing a slowdown in its growth rate, and we are seeing an acceleration. It isn't for nothing that The Economist, the Financial Times, and every leading sets of those who are analyzing the global economy, Morgan Stanley, or anyone else, Bloomberg, all of them are turning around and pointing to the fact that the growth spot today in the world is India, and in tomorrow also it will be the growth spot of the world. Therefore, there is all good news as far as we are concerned. I like to say to people I speak to that I don't know about my time, but your time will be one of Amrit Kal.
Absolutely. When we talk about this is, of course, one of the Amrit Kal. And when we talk about all these issues, when we talk about economy, when we talk about climate, and when we talk about all these major issues that have really contributed towards India now coming to a consensus and standing at such an important juncture, the women-led development is also a point, very crucial area to talk about. From developing various areas for the betterment of women to women-led development, India has changed a major shift over the years.
Look, it's one thing to say that can you do it with 50% of the population not participating? I think the answer is crystal clear. If 50% does not participate, you aren't going to go places. We did a lot in this. Remember, when the Panchayati Raj bill was passed, we reserved 1/3 of the place for women. And today, India has more elected women in all kinds of elected bodies, including parliament, panchayats, etc., than the rest of the world put together. So it has been a gradual but certainly upward moving change. Now, look at the change that we brought about. It's not just women's participation, but let them have leadership roles. Let them come to the front, because the world has seen that, this is a 50% of the population. It is not only about participation. If they lead the growth, you might just see that the growth will be one which will be high, good, forward-looking, but also which would take care of this other element which is particularly important, our planet, our family, the societal things, side of things, and each of these particular things. Isn't it what is our requirement for today? We've done a hell of a lot in terms of materialistic gains, but it is important for us to remember that it is one planet, and we have to look at the social side also of all of this, because it's only with harmony, with sustainability, that we are going to be able to take things forward. And I think women have a special role and idea and understanding and can contribute to it. Their leadership must be brought to the fore.
And in this journey of India from becoming a developing nation to become and aiming to become a developed nation, the relationship and the bilateral relationship, the geopolitical connections of India and especially of Prime Minister Narendra Modi with the foreign leaders have played a huge and significant role. We saw it in the declaration last year when this is not an era of war was written in the documents, and now we see it in this consensus of adopting a declaration of New Delhi G20 summit as well, sir.
The Prime Minister, first note, the Honorable Prime Minister is perhaps one of the most senior G20 leaders here, having attended these since 2014. So, he has a special place. Now, he's also a person who has made the effort to reach out. And he's done it to all of them, including those who are not there today in New Delhi. It has been the hallmark of his presidency to go out, to reach out, to actually try and understand what the others want, to invite them to India, and to make them part of the India story and make India part of their story. So, his personal contribution is something that is apparent and obvious for everyone to see. When you see the leaders walk the red carpet, if I may use that expression, what do? Why do they unhesitatingly, spread their arms and give him a hug? He used to initially do it when he met them, when he became Prime Minister in 2014-15. But now all the others see that here is somebody with whom they have developed a chemistry. It's a chemistry that gels. And they also see India as a big country of interest. His leadership, in their view, is leadership which is good for India. But at the end of the day, I can tell you, These are well-seasoned people. They see their own interest in the matter. So it's good chemistry, interests coming together, all of that, which certainly points in the direction of an emerged India.
And Ambassador Puri, when we talk about the chemistry, this reminds me of the very moment when Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited the White House, and he said that a few years ago it was really difficult for him to get inside it, and now is the time when he's inside it. 7,000 Indians are also there for the very first time. And not only this, at the Quad meeting also, President Joe Biden walked up to him and said that you've got a really huge fan following, and I am really looking forward to the G20 summit in New Delhi.
Well, I have absolutely no doubt about it. Look, the fact that, when you were not president, you couldn't get into the White House, we all know that. But, it's the way of saying it is a story of his own life. So I don't have to repeat that. Everybody in India knows that, and everybody in the world knows it. But this is the beauty of Indian democracy. You can start wherever. If you are good, if people like you, you can rise to the very top. And we have had that in many other prime ministers of ours also. Shri Narendra Modi also epitomizes and symbolizes this fact that India is a democracy which elects its leaders and gives an opportunity to anyone who can make it and convince the people that he or she is the absolute right person. You mentioned the White House, President Biden. Look, there should be no doubt in anybody's mind. And I think this was most evident in the images that you, as well as the other channels, showed yesterday when President Biden landed in India, drove from the airport straight to the Prime Minister's residence for a meeting and then to have a dinner with him. And look at those few minutes when there were just the two of them. The obviousness of the chemistry gelling was so much there. And, these are the things that matter. Now, let me say this to you. Countries, especially large countries, and which have been there for a long time, like the United States, they are not going to forego their national interests at all. But leaders matter. And leaders play that little marginal role, which is actually most important at critical times. And that's where chemistry comes into play. So it's not only about chemistry, but chemistry matters to make the last mile connectivity, and that's important.
And to also notice that now we really believe that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been the real leader, because when we talk about all these developments all together, all we can say that he's been a true leader. Now we've got a tweet from G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant also. He said that New Delhi Leaders Declaration has been officially adopted at the G20 India Leader Summit. So he says that today's era must be marked as the golden age of human-centric globalization, and India's G20 presidency under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi has worked tirelessly towards this goal. So an era of global development, global civilization and global progressiveness as well, Ambassador Puri.
Human-centric globalization. The Prime Minister was using the expression human-centric development, which is important for India. But this is the G20. And so Amitabh is absolutely right. Human-centric globalization. In the questions you asked me before, one side of the questions were about materialistic growth. And yes, we must address them because that's the nature of human evolution, development, growth. And then comes the other aspect. After all, we are looking at our planet and we are looking at our people, all of us as people. And so therefore, whatever we may do in terms of materialism, the fact is it must be human-centric, because that's why all this materialism is what we are talking about. So I'm very happy for Sherpa Amitabh Kant, an extraordinary, wonderful individual, and the entire team, which I'm sure has worked tirelessly. And this is all huge credit to them. Of course, the Honorable Prime Minister is the leader. And, things have happened under his, as they say, patronage. He is the one who drives relationships with other leaders. But we must at this stage acknowledge the Sherpa and the entire team that worked on the G20.
And especially considering the fact that this has not really been a very easy task, considering the geopolitical conditions and situations that everybody is facing and witnessing right now.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a contentious time. We are all talking about Ukraine. And I haven't seen the declaration, so we have to see what the wordings are, etc. But, it's easier said than actually achieved. Think of the divergences of the position. Think of what the Europeans in particular were saying, that, unless it happens, nothing will happen. This is the nature of the game. It's not as if debt, setting the debt issues right was an easy one. You think anybody would be willing to come so easily forward on climate finance, even though they know that it's particularly important for them also? However, this is where the abilities, the sagacity, and the work done by the Sherpa himself and the entire team, needs to be acknowledged. They have worked along with their colleagues from the other G20 countries, crafted language. See, let me make one point. The G20 is not a charter making, it's not a charter body. It's not the place where laws get made. It's a place where countries come together. So either they take decisions that they will nationally work together on specific subjects in a particular direction, and when the entire world works or the largest countries work in a particular manner, the work gets done. The other is they've taken these decisions, as they say, behind the doors. So when they meet at the relevant charter-making bodies, whether it's the UN or the World Bank or the IMF or the WTO, the largest countries are of one mind and decisions get taken there, which are truly the de jure decisions.
And
this is why the G20 is important.
Right. And ahead of the COP28 summit, the declaration also focuses on the sustainable development goals. Now, how important this becomes, because considering the fact that we also had a few important and critical moments and voices from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as well.
Well, this is the midpoint of the Sustainable Development Goals, where 2030 is the end date. Now, there's no doubt, and we can blame COVID for that, but the world has fallen behind. In fact, there are hardly any countries which are on track to meet their SDG commitments. The globe as such is far behind. So I'm not surprised that Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, used his pulpit here in New Delhi to pitch for the world doing something together. And I am glad that we have taken some steps. I haven't had a chance to read this declaration. Let it come out in the open. We'll know exactly what has happened. But the directional push that we must, as the largest economies in the world, we must push to ensure that the SDGs are not slipped, but that the SDGs are met, is particularly important.
Multilateralism is also there. That has been asserted.
Yeah, let me take a minute. You mentioned COP. That's a slightly different subject, a very focused area. The area of greenhouse, global warming, climate change. And the COP28, which will be held in Dubai towards the end of this year, is particularly important. I hope the declaration has something quite meaningful on climate finance. I have little doubt that it does, because just several months earlier, in the finance track, it was agreed that a special group will be set up, which will focus on the reform of the multilateral development banks. And let me say this to you, while an Indian and an American are the two co-chairs, the Chinese is also a member of it. And that is taking things forward. Please go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's okay, completely fine, sir. And to bring our viewers the focus of the joint declaration, the declaration focuses on strong and sustainable, balanced along with inclusive growth. And as I was mentioning, reinvigorating multilateralism has also been there, Ambassador Puri. When we talk about multilateralism, this tough time and then this achieving at this joint consensus, mutually agreed consensus on announcing the declaration, how important this becomes. This is also the focus of the declaration now.
Many people say actually reinvigorating, there's a kind of damping. But that's not the point. Look, I think there is a clear recognition in the world that the multilateral system, which was created at the end of Second World War, needs to be reformed. And why does it need to be reformed? Because contemporary realities are quite different from the state of play of the world when the United Nations, the World Bank, etc. were created. I mean, think about this. India was yet to gain its independence. You know where the Chinese were. Today, they are the second largest economy in the world. Germany and Japan, if you please, were losers out there. So, it's case of victors of that time, but the world has changed. Today, it's not the Atlantic Ocean, which is the centerpiece of action, but things are very fast moving in the direction of the Indo-Pacific. And Asia is becoming center stage to all of these actions. Therefore, the need for multilateralism to be reinvigorated, reformed, we can use whatever more. But the reality is that it needs to, adapt itself and change to meet contemporary realities so that it is fit for purpose in the coming century.
Another very important focus of the joint declaration would be on multilateral institutions for the 21st century, for which India has relentlessly worked over the past few years. We've seen that in the examples of MDPs. We've seen that in the examples of structural reforms and the changes that we've witnessed every year since past 9 years, especially. Ambassador Puri.
You're absolutely right. I mentioned to you that I believe one of our important takeaways from this G20 presidency is the setting up of this expert group on the reform of the multilateral development banks. Now, whether we like it or not, they are extremely important for the developing world for not just providing capital, which is very important for the vast number of countries in the developing world, perhaps not so much for countries like India anymore, but are very important for acting as catalysts for private capital to move to the largest developing economy. This includes India. As I mentioned to you, we also need private capital from the world to flow to our side. So this group has presented one report. Let me make a little point to you. While the summit will end tomorrow, India's presidency of the G20 will only end in November. And before that happens, the second part of the report of this expert group on multilateral development banks will have presented its report, possibly at the World Bank's Autumn Summit in Marrakesh in October this year. And that, I believe, will contain specific areas of action which have been pushed by India and many in the global south.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri, for joining us and bringing us a rounded perspective with in-depth analysis on the latest announcement of the G20 summit that has now reached to a consensus of adopting a mutual declaration. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back.